In South Australia, close to Mount Gambier, is the Piccaninnie Ponds Conservation Park. The spring system at Piccaninnie Ponds is very popular within the cave diving community due to the vast number of small caves and ponds. There are two sides that divers can tackle the system. The most popular attraction for cave divers is a 30-metre long vertical fissure known as the Cathedral. The Cathedral is home to stunningly clear water and beautiful aquatic plants and animals. On the other side is the chasm, which goes into Dogleg and the Saddle. This section of the cave goes much deeper, but is more dangerous and should only be tackled by very experienced divers. The system was discovered in 1960 and has never been bottomed, but divers have reported reaching depths of up to 100 metres. The Piccaninnie Ponds are, however, notorious for accidents that claim the lives of several divers over a 12-year span. Today I will be covering each incident from 1972 to 1984. These are the stories of the Piccaninnie Ponds cave diving disasters. This week's video is sponsored by Surfshark. Look, I cover disasters all the time, and let me tell you, browsing the internet without a VPN is a disaster. A VPN keeps you safe online by encrypting your information, hiding your location, and blocking malicious websites and phishing scams. So why do I use Surfshark? It's pretty simple really. UK Netflix kinda sucks. Surfshark allows you to connect to servers around the world, meaning I can access their Netflix catalogues and never run out of anything to watch. More importantly, I work away from home a lot, which means connecting to public Wi-Fi. With Surfshark, I can connect to these safely without the threat of my online data being breached, which today happens way more than you think. Make sure you enter my promo code Disasterthon below to get 83% off and 3 months extra for free. If you don't like it, there'll be a 100% money back guarantee. The first cave diving disaster at Piccaninnie Ponds occurred on the 29th of January 1972. It was 4:30 PM, which saw 20-year-old Lyle and his friend Philip visit Piccaninnie to go cave diving. Both were very inexperienced in cave diving and were unaware of the dangers that could present themselves to a naive diver. They had diving tanks, but they were only about a third full when they started their dive. After exploring the main chasm, the pair decided on one more stop before heading back. The spot was a small cave found on the floor of Turtle Pond at a depth of around 4 metres. At this point, the two were low on air, and as Lyle entered the passage, he pulled his air reserve lever. Lyle grabbed onto Philip's left foot as the once clear water rapidly turned completely dark. They had silted out the passage. The pair knew that they were in trouble, so decided to turn around to find the exit. When they turned around, they couldn't see the exit as their visibility was next to none. They were now surrounded by darkness. At this point, Lyle had to let go of Philip's foot to pull his reserve air lever. Lyle never grabbed back onto his foot. Philip frantically searched for the exit and finally saw light. He swam towards the light and escaped. He assumed that Lyle must have gotten out, but there was no sign of his friend. He returned briefly into the now entirely silted out cave to look for him. Lyle was nowhere to be seen. Philip then surfaced and ran for help. He never saw his friend alive again. A few hours later, after help arrived, a diver called Herman entered Piccaninnie Ponds to look for Lyle. It took him only minutes to find his body, which was a few metres inside of the tunnel. Lyle was face down in the mud, his scuba tank completely empty. This accident made its way around the cave diving community and once more illustrated the dangers of diving in caves without the correct equipment and safety lines. They were completely unaware of silt outs or how to get out of them safely. The next disaster didn't strike until 2 years later, on the 23rd of December 1974. 27-year-old Brian and his friend Claudio were so excited to dive in Piccaninnie Ponds that they had set up a buoy and a vertical shot line the night before so that they wouldn't be wasting any time. Brian had been diving for around 2 years, but this was going to be the deepest dive he had ever done. On that day, the pair entered Piccaninnie Ponds at 8:30 in the morning and swam out to the buoy and began their dive. The pair stopped at 9 meters to adjust their equipment and then carried on down the shot line. After exploring the main chasm, which is at a depth at around 30 to 40 meters, they then entered the small tunnel known as the Dogleg, which descended vertically to a depth of around 60 meters. After they reached their destination, at the end of Dogleg, Brian touched Claudio's shoulder and signalled to him that he wanted to start the ascent and go back up. They gave each other the OK sign, and before they started their ascent, Claudio turned on his air reserve. For the ascent, the pair grabbed onto each other so that they wouldn't lose each other on the way up. The ascent was going as expected until the pair reached a depth of around 45 meters. At this point, Claudio was having trouble breathing as his cylinder was near empty. Things then went from bad to worse. Claudio had noticed that Brian had stopped ascending. He was confused to why, but assumed that he must have got tangled within the guideline. Claudio now had a harrowing decision to make: free his friend and face the chance of drowning, or leave him behind. He chose the latter and reached the spare cylinder that they had put at the depth of 9 meters for the decompression process. Claudio then had to decompress for 25 minutes. During this, as time ticked on, he knew his friend had drowned below him. He continued to wait in agonizing silence until his decompression stage was complete. He then surfaced and went to get help. As they believed Brian was already dead, the search for his body didn't commence until the next day. They found his body 57 meters into their search. The rescue divers said that when they found his body, his face mask was dislodged and his arms were outstretched like he was pleading for help. As Claudio suspected, the lower half of his body was entangled within the guideline. The findings from the police added mystery to the story, as his scuba cylinder still contained 700 psi of air. They performed an autopsy and came to the conclusion that Brian had suffered from significant decompression consequences, but the majority of people don't believe this, as it is unlikely from the reported events. Additionally, it was believed that Brian may have been unintentionally kicked in the face by Claudio during their ascent up Dogleg, but this is unconfirmed. It is most likely that the pair both suffered badly from nitrogen narcosis. Nitrogen narcosis is a change in consciousness and behaviour brought on by breathing compressed inert gases. This is believed because neither diver thought to use their knife to cut Brian free, which would be the first thing that you would do. There hadn't been a disaster for around 8 years until 1984, when Piccaninnie Ponds claimed their third and fourth victims. These victims were 28-year-old John and 31-year-old Barry, two good friends who had been diving with each other for a significant amount of years. John gained his cave diving qualifications 8 months before the incident, but Barry, although having scuba diving qualifications, never attained any cave diving qualifications. That morning was the 7th of April 1984, and according to John's wife, the pair intended to do a quick dive as John had an appointment at 10. The two then started their dive and the rest is history. Fast forward to 9 o'clock, Gordon and Roger, two Victorian cave divers, arrived at Piccaninnie Ponds ready to dive. They noticed John's car in the park and went out to the landing to look for some bubbles, but were unable to see any. Assuming the car belonged to walkers, at around 10:15 am, they prepared their equipment and began their descent. They dived to the beginning of the Dogleg and were shocked to see a scuba cylinder fastened by a rope to a wall. With the cylinder was a pair of regulators and a guideline, which had been dropped down further into the tunnel. The two divers knew something was wrong, and as there was no bubbles rising from Dogleg, they cautiously descended to a depth of around 45 meters before seeing another guideline which had been attached above a region known as the saddle. This is when they noticed torches in the distance. 15 meters below were John and Barry. The two were clearly dead, so they returned to the surface where they contacted the police. The recovery began, which proved quite difficult for police divers because of the depth the two bodies were at. When the police found their bodies, they were badly entangled into their guideline. They were so badly entangled, that it was looped around their body multiple times. They had tried to free themselves, but were obviously unsuccessful. The two had descended more than 30 meters deeper than the maximum permitted depth. It was shown that the maximum depth that they had reached was 68 meters. The police divers believed that when the pair were ascending, they became entangled in their guideline. Due to the effects of nitrogen narcosis, the two were unable to get themselves free, their single cylinders then ran out, and the pair sadly died. Although this marked the first death for nearly 10 years, the news media dug out some earlier incidents that I talked about and claimed that the killer caves were once again to blame. Powerful people such as politicians once more furiously demanded that all cave diving activities be stopped and banned, but this never happened. Permission is needed to dive at the ponds, and although it's still a very popular destination for divers, the disasters of the past will always be a reminder of the risks that can occur when you dive unprepared.